I stood at the altar in the borrowed wedding dress that reeked of mothballs, watching my mother's satisfied smirk from the front pew, and wondered if she'd still be smiling in 5 minutes when everything she'd schemed for turned to ash. The wedding march played through tinny speakers in the registry office, not even a proper church because my family hadn't wanted to waste money on me. My stepfather, Marcus, squeezed my arm too tight as he walked me down the aisle, his fingers digging into my skin through the thin fabric. A warning. A reminder that I was property being transferred, nothing more. "Don't embarrass us," he hissed under his breath, his smile never wavering for the handful of guests. "You're getting more than you deserve." I kept my eyes forward, on the wheelchair at the end of the aisle. On the man slumped in it, his head bowed, dark hair falling across his face. Christopher Blackwood. The crippled heir to the Blackwood fortune. The man I was being sold to like livestock. The man who, in my previous life, I had run from in horror. The man whose supposed disability was the most elaborate lie I'd ever witnessed. My heart pounded, but not with fear, with anticipation, with the sweet, intoxicating promise of revenge that had sustained me through 6 months of reliving my 20th year on this earth. Because I knew something no one else in this room knew. Christopher Blackwood could walk, could run, could destroy my family with a single phone call, and in approximately 4 minutes, he was going to stand up. 6 months ago, I died in a hospital bed, alone and broke, while my mother and stepsister Vanessa partied on a yacht in the Mediterranean with money they'd stolen from me. I was 25 years old. I'd spent 5 years married to Richard Chen, the man my family had pushed me toward after I ran from the arranged marriage to Christopher Blackwood. Richard, who seemed so kind and stable compared to the cripple my family had tried to sell me to. Richard, who turned out to be a con artist working with my mother and sister to drain my inheritance from my late father. The inheritance I didn't even know I had until it was gone. In my previous life, when I turned 20, my biological father, whom I'd never known, died and left me everything. $15 million, stocks, properties, a legacy meant to secure my future. The lawyer tried to reach me, but my mother intercepted every call, every letter. She forged my signature on documents transferring control to her. And when I finally found out 2 years into my marriage to Richard, it was too late. The money was gone. Spent, gambled, transferred to offshore accounts I'd never be able to touch. I tried to fight back, hired a lawyer with what little I had left. My mother responded by having me declared mentally incompetent. Vanessa had poisoned my food with drugs for months, documenting my erratic behavior. Richard backed her up, testifying that I'd tried to attack him, that I was delusional, dangerous. I spent a year in a psychiatric facility. By the time I got out, my mother had sold everything, and my name was mud. No one would hire me. Richard had divorced me and married Vanessa. That had been the plan all along, apparently. They were living in a penthouse bought with my inheritance while I slept in a homeless shelter. I worked 3 jobs trying to survive. Caught pneumonia walking home in the rain because I couldn't afford the bus. Died in a charity hospital ward with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, thinking about all the moments where I could have made different choices. The moment I could have married Christopher Blackwood instead of running away. When I opened my eyes again, I was 20 years old, staring at the ceiling of my childhood bedroom in my mother's house. The same water stain, the same crack in the corner, the same feeling of suffocating dread that had characterized my entire adolescence. My first thought was that I'd had a nightmare. My second thought, when I saw the date on my phone, was that I'd gone insane. My third thought was, I'm not going to waste this. It took me a week to accept that I'd truly traveled back in time, that I had a second chance at my 20-year-old life. A week of testing the theory, of watching events I remembered unfold exactly as they had before. My mother's boyfriend, Marcus, moving into the house. Vanessa borrowing my clothes without asking. The small cruelties that I'd once accepted as normal family dynamics, now recognized for what they were. Systematic abuse designed to keep me compliant and controllable. They'd been grooming me for years to be the perfect victim. Not this time. The letter from the lawyer about my inheritance arrived exactly when I remembered it arriving. This time, I got to it first. Read about the father I'd never known, the wealth he'd accumulated, The guilt that had made him leave it all to the daughter he'd abandoned. $15 million. I didn't tell my mother. I met with the lawyer alone, used the fake ID I'd gotten in my previous life for exactly this purpose. Set up accounts in my name only. Transferred assets to trust funds that my mother couldn't touch. By the time she found out about my inheritance 2 weeks later, it was locked away where her forged signatures would do her no good. The screaming match that followed was almost worth it. "After everything I've done for you," my mother shrieked, her face red with rage. "I raised you, fed you, kept a roof over your head." "You're legally obligated to do that," I said calmly. "It's called being a parent." "Don't you dare take that tone with me, you ungrateful assay." "I spoke to the lawyer," I interrupted. "The inheritance is in a trust. You can't touch it until I'm 25, and only if I authorize the release." A lie, but a useful one. Let her think she still had a chance. Her expression shifted, the rage smoothing into calculation. I'd seen that look before in my previous life, though I hadn't understood it then. "Well," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "I suppose we can wait. You're my daughter, after all. I only want what's best for you." That's when I knew what was coming. Within a week, she started talking about Christopher Blackwood. "He's from a very good family," my mother said over dinner, her tone casual in the way that meant she'd been planning this conversation. "The Blackwoods own half the commercial real estate in the city." "Mm-hmm," I said, pushing food around my plate. "And I've heard through certain channels that they're looking for a bride for their son." I set down my fork. "And why would they be interested in me?" "Because you're beautiful and intelligent and from a respectable family," my mother said, each word a lie. "And because they need someone who won't judge their son for his condition." "Condition?" "He was in a car accident 5 years ago. He's paralyzed from the waist down in a wheelchair." She said it with practiced sympathy. Such a tragedy for such a wealthy family. They've been looking for a suitable match for years, but all the society girls turn up their noses. In my previous life, this was where I'd felt sorry for Christopher Blackwood, where I'd imagined being stuck in a wheelchair, how awful that must be, how I couldn't possibly add to his suffering by rejecting him too. Then I'd met him, seen the cold calculation in his eyes, felt the way he looked at me like I was a thing to be acquired, not a person. And I'd run, sobbing, straight into Richard Chen's comforting arms. This time, I had the benefit of knowledge. I knew that Christopher Blackwood had never been paralyzed. The wheelchair was a test, a way to filter out gold diggers and social climbers, a way to see who would marry him for love or strategic alliance rather than his ability to walk into a room. I knew that Christopher Blackwood was brilliant, ruthless, and had built his family's real estate empire into a multinational conglomerate while pretending to be a tragic invalid. I knew that in my original timeline, he'd married someone else 2 years after I rejected him, a woman who'd seen past the wheelchair to the man underneath. They'd been featured in Forbes as a power couple within 3 years. And I knew that my mother had been offered an obscene amount of money to deliver me to that altar, whether I wanted to go or not. "You want to sell me," I said flatly. "I want to secure your future," my mother snapped. "Do you think your inheritance will last forever? You're a child. You don't understand money management. But married to a Blackwood, you'd never have to worry about anything." "How much are they paying you?" Her face went white, then red. "How dare you?" "How much, Mother?" $2 million, Vanessa said from the doorway. She leaned against the frame, examining her nails. Dowry, they called it. But really, it's a finder's fee for providing damaged goods. She smiled at me, all teeth. "They're desperate, apparently. Can't find anyone willing to marry a cripple." "Vanessa!" my mother hissed. "What? She's going to find out anyway when she sees the contract." Vanessa wandered into the room, grabbed an apple from the fruit bowl. "Personally, I think it's hilarious. Poor, pathetic Claire. Finally worth something. All it took was finding someone even more pathetic than her." In my previous life, those words had shattered me. I'd locked myself in my room and cried for hours. This time I smiled. "Tell them I'll do it," I said. My mother blinked. "What?" "The marriage. I'll do it. Set up the meeting." I watched confusion flicker across both their faces. This wasn't in their script. I was supposed to resist, to cry, to need convincing. Then they could pressure me, manipulate me, maybe even force me. Turn me into the victim one more time. "Just like that?" Vanessa said suspiciously. "No crying, no, you can't make me?" "I've thought about it," I said calmly. "A marriage to Christopher Blackwood gives me protection, status, and access to resources. My inheritance is secure either way. Why shouldn't I accept?" The truth was simpler. I knew what was coming. I knew Richard Chen was already circling, preparing his con. I knew my mother and sister were planning to systematically drain me of everything I had. And I knew that Christopher Blackwood, for all his deception, had never stolen from anyone. Never pretended love to commit fraud. A business arrangement with an honest liar was better than false love from thieves. "Well," my mother said, recovering, "that's very mature of you, darling. When do I meet him?" "Next week, the family estate." She was already calculating, I could see it, probably revising her plans now that I'd agreed so easily, wondering if she could squeeze more money out of the deal. Let her wonder, let her plan. In 7 days, nothing would go the way she expected. The Blackwood estate was exactly as I remembered it from my brief, disastrous visit in my previous life. A sprawling mansion of stone and glass surrounded by 10 acres of manicured gardens. Old money, displayed with quiet taste. I was brought to a sitting room by a butler who'd perfected the art of looking through people rather than at them. My mother had dressed me in a demure blue dress, styled my hair in soft curls, coached me on how to behave. "Be sympathetic, but not pitying," she'd instructed. "Smile, but don't be too cheerful. Act like the disability doesn't matter, but don't ignore it completely. And for God's sake, don't mention money." I nodded along, let her think I was listening. Christopher Blackwood was already in the room when I entered, his wheelchair positioned by a window overlooking the gardens. He didn't turn when I came in, just continued staring outside. "Miss Chen," he said. His voice was deep, controlled. "Please, sit." I settled. Into the armchair across from him, folded my hands in my lap. Waited. He finally turned to look at me, and I was struck again by how handsome he was. Dark eyes, sharp features, the kind of face that belonged on magazine covers. In my previous life, I'd been too frightened to really look at him, too busy seeing the wheelchair to see the man. "I assume your mother explained the situation," he said. "She mentioned a marriage arrangement, a business proposition. And you're willing? Are you?" His eyebrow raised slightly. "I asked first." "I'm willing to discuss terms," I said carefully. "I understand you need a wife. I need protection from my family, primarily." That surprised him. I watched the calculation in his eyes shift. "Your family. My mother wants control of my inheritance. She's been trying to access it since it was left to me. An arranged marriage to you would put me legally beyond her reach." I met his gaze steadily. "I assume you have similar pressures. Family expectations. Business needs that require a certain image. You're very frank. I don't see the point in pretending this is a love match." He studied me for a long moment. In my previous life, this was where I'd started crying, where I'd stammered about how I couldn't possibly marry someone I didn't love, how I was so sorry, but I just couldn't. "I had heard you were resistant to this arrangement," Christopher said. "I reconsidered. I'm 20 years old with a substantial inheritance and no protection. Every con artist and gold digger in the city is going to come after me. But as your wife, I'd be untouchable." I paused. and you get what you need. A wife who won't judge you for your disability, who will fulfill the social obligations without expecting more than you can give. The lie sat between us, elegant and mutual. He couldn't walk, so he couldn't be a real husband. I was fine with a business arrangement. Neither of us acknowledged the truth humming underneath. You'd be willing to sign a prenuptial agreement, he said. Your inheritance remains yours. My assets remain mine. Of course. And you'd fulfill the duties expected of my wife. Attend events, manage the household, present a united front. Yes. No extramarital affairs, no public scandals. Agreed. Same terms for you. He smiled just slightly. I don't think you need to worry about my ability to cause scandals, Miss Chen. The disability excuse. So carefully deployed. Then we have an agreement? I asked. Pending approval from my family, yes. He rolled his wheelchair forward slightly. May I ask what changed your mind? Your mother seemed to think you'd require significant convincing. My mother doesn't know me as well as she thinks, I said. And I'm pragmatic. This arrangement benefits us both. What I didn't say, I know you can walk. I know this is all theater. I know that in 4 months on our wedding day, you're going to stand up and reveal the truth to see if I'll run screaming. And I'm not going to run. I'm going to stand there and smile while my mother realizes she's sold me to a man worth 50 times what she was paid, and that her access to me and my money is gone forever. Christopher Blackwood extended his hand. I shook it, his grip firm and warm. Welcome to the family, Claire, he said. The next 4 months were a masterclass in manipulation from my mother and sister. They thought they had me trapped. Thought that once I was married, they could position themselves as my support system, slowly work their way into my new life, find ways to access both my money and the Blackwood fortune. They didn't know I was documenting everything. Every time Vanessa borrowed my jewelry and sold it, I recorded it. Every time my mother took money from my purse, I noted it. Every phone call from Richard Chen, who'd started appearing at coffee shops I frequented, I saved and backed up. Because I knew what was coming. In my previous life, I'd never connected the dots. Never realized that my mother had orchestrated my meeting with Richard, that he'd been the backup plan if the arranged marriage fell through. Never understood that every chance encounter was choreographed. This time, I collected evidence like a dragon hoarding gold. You'll need to introduce Christopher to Richard, my mother said one evening, 2 months before the wedding. He's such a nice young man, and he'd be a good friend for your husband. Someone who could help him, given his limitations. Help him how? I asked innocently. Well, Christopher can't exactly manage physical activities. Richard is so active, so capable. He could be useful. To manage the estate? Christopher has staff for that. To manage you, Vanessa said, not bothering to be subtle. Come on, Claire. You can't expect to stay married to a cripple and never have any fun. Richard could be your friend. Christopher would probably be grateful someone was keeping you happy so he doesn't have to pretend. They wanted me to have an affair, wanted me compromised and vulnerable so they could blackmail me, or use it as leverage in a divorce. Then Richard would rescue me, and we'd end up right where we had in my first life. I'll think about it, I said. I didn't introduce them, but I let Richard keep running into me. Let him buy me coffee, listen to his practiced lines about how difficult it must be, preparing to marry someone with such challenges. Let him position himself as the understanding friend. And I recorded every conversation where he suggested I didn't have to go through with the wedding. Every time he implied Christopher was less than a man, every moment he thought he was grooming his next victim. The lawyer I'd hired was building quite a file. Meanwhile, I was preparing for the wedding with cold efficiency. The Blackwoods wanted a small ceremony, immediate family only, they said. Christopher's mother had looked at me with something like pity during our one meeting, clearly believing her son was settling for whatever he could get. I let them think that. Let them believe I was a social climbing nobody who got lucky. The dress was the one concession I made to tradition. I could have bought something extravagant, used my inheritance to make a statement. Instead, I rented a simple white gown because I knew it would feed the narrative. Poor Claire can't even afford a proper wedding dress. The Blackwoods must be desperate indeed. My mother complained constantly about the small ceremony. She'd wanted a spectacle, hundreds of guests, a chance to show off her connection to the Blackwood name. But Christopher's family held firm, immediate family only, which meant my mother, Marcus, and Vanessa on my side, Christopher's parents and his younger sister on his, and a registry office instead of a church, because why waste money on pageantry for a marriage that was clearly a business arrangement? My mother was furious, but there was nothing she could do. She'd already been paid her finder's fee. The contracts were signed. The week before the wedding, I moved my inheritance into a new trust that even the lawyer couldn't access without a court order. Set up automatic payments to charities. Created a trail that would be impossible to falsify. And then I made one final call. "Mr. Blackwood," I said when Christopher answered his private line, "I need to ask you something before the wedding." "Ask." "In 6 months, I'm going to want a divorce." Silence on the line. "Not because of you," I continued, "but because I need to prove something to certain people. I need them to think they've won, that they've broken up my marriage. Can you tolerate that? Can we maintain this arrangement for 6 months, let them think they've successfully destroyed it, and then reassess?" "What are you planning, Claire?" "Legal revenge," I said, "on nothing that will splash back on you or your family, but I need to let them think they have power over me for just a little longer." Another pause, then 6 months, and then we discuss terms for continuing the arrangement or ending it legally. Agreed. Claire? Yes? I'm starting to think you're far more interesting than your mother led me to believe. I smiled at the phone. You have no idea, Mr. Blackwood. The morning of the wedding, Vanessa tried to poison me. Not lethally, she wasn't that bold, but she added enough sedatives to my morning tea to make me groggy, confused, easier to control. I'd been expecting it. Had seen her do it in my previous life, though then I'd thought I was just nervous and tired. I dumped the tea in the potted plant and pretended to drink it. Stumbled a bit getting dressed. Let her think it was working. "Poor Claire," she cooed, helping me with the zipper. "Are you feeling all right? You look pale." "Just nervous," I slurred slightly, and "Of course you are. Marrying a cripple. God, if it were me, I'd have run. Away by now." She adjusted my veil with rough hands. "But then, you never were very brave, were you?" In my previous life, I'd started crying. This time, I met her eyes in the mirror. "No," I said clearly, the slur gone. "But I'm learning," her smile faltered. "What?" "The tea," I said. "I didn't drink it, and I know about you and Richard. I know about all of it." Her face went white. "Don't worry," I continued, turning to face her. "I'm still going through with the wedding. But after today, you're cut off. No more access to my money. No more access to me. Consider this your last day as my sister." "You can't." "I can. I have lawyers, Vanessa. Real ones, not whatever discount criminals you and Mother have been using. And after today, I'll have the Blackwood legal team too." I smiled. "You really should have let me marry Christopher the first time around. It would have saved everyone so much trouble." I walked out, leaving her frozen in my childhood bedroom. My mother was waiting at the bottom of the stairs, already dressed in an expensive purple suit that my inheritance had paid for. She looked me over critically. "Well," she said, "you clean up adequately. Try not to embarrass us." "Mother," I said calmly, "after today we won't be seeing much of each other." "Don't be ridiculous. You're still my daughter." "Legally, barely. Emotionally, not at all." I picked up my small bouquet. "You sold me. I'm letting you, but that's the end of our relationship." "You ungrateful—" "I'm grateful for many things," I interrupted. "Grateful I learned what betrayal looks like. Grateful I discovered how strong I could be. Grateful that I'm about to walk into a marriage that will protect me from ever being vulnerable to you again." Marcus appeared from the kitchen, already half drunk. "Are we leaving or what? I didn't put on this monkey suit to stand around listening to you two bicker." My mother's expression smoothed into artificial warmth. Of course, darling. Claire and I were just having a little mother-daughter moment. I followed them to the car, watching my childhood home disappear in the rearview mirror. I would never come back here. This chapter of my life was closing forever. Good riddance. The registry office was brutally utilitarian. Fluorescent lights, plastic chairs, a small room with an altar that was really just a desk. The officiant was a tired-looking woman with reading glasses on a chain. Christopher was already there, in his wheelchair, wearing a perfectly tailored black suit. His parents sat in the front row, his mother dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. His father, stern-faced and silent. His sister Emma gave me a small, encouraging smile that said she felt sorry for both of us. My mother, Marcus, and Vanessa settled into chairs on my side with varying expressions of satisfaction and resentment. This was their victory, they thought. They'd successfully disposed of me and gotten paid for it. The ceremony began. It was perfunctory, mechanical. The officiant clearly performed dozens of these a day, running through the script with practiced efficiency. Do you take this man, do you take this woman, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health? The sickness clause felt like a private joke. Christopher held my hand as we exchanged rings. His was warm, steady. When he looked at me, there was something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Curiosity, maybe. Or respect. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the officiant said. You may kiss the bride. This was the moment I'd been dreading in my previous life. The thought of kissing a man I didn't love who couldn't even stand up to meet me. Christopher pulled me gently toward him, his hand on the back of my head, and kissed me softly. It was chaste, appropriate for the setting, but there was promise in it, a suggestion of depths unexplored. When we pulled apart, he smiled at me, a real smile, not the calculated expressions I'd seen before. And then he put his hands on the armrests of the wheelchair, and then he stood up. The room went silent. Christopher Blackwood stood at the altar, a full head taller than me, and stretched like a man who'd been sitting too long. He rolled his shoulders, bent his knees experimentally, then turned to face our families. Surprise, he said. My mother's face was a portrait of confusion. What? What is this? This, Christopher said, taking my hand, is my wife discovering that I'm not quite as disabled as advertised. He looked down at me. You knew. It wasn't a question. I suspected, I said. Did my research. You married me anyway. I married you because of it. Anyone who'd go to this much trouble to avoid gold diggers is someone I could do business with. He laughed, actually laughed, and pulled me closer. Claire Blackwood, you are full of surprises. Wait, my mother was on her feet. You're not crippled? You've been lying this whole time? For 5 years, yes, Christopher said cheerfully. It's quite effective at filtering out inappropriate matches. People reveal their true character when they think you're vulnerable. But the contract... The contract is valid, Christopher's father said, speaking for the first time. His voice was cold with satisfaction. Your daughter married my son of her own free will. The marriage is legal and binding. And the money? Vanessa demanded. You paid for damaged goods? We paid a finder's fee for an introduction, Christopher's mother said primly, which was rendered. The marriage has occurred. Our obligation is fulfilled. I watched my family's faces cycle through confusion, anger, and finally horror as the implications sank in. They'd sold me to a man they thought was desperate and broken. Instead, they'd delivered me to one of the wealthiest, most powerful men in the country, a man who was now legally entitled to protect me from them, a man who just revealed he'd been testing everyone around him for 5 years. You played us, my mother whispered. No, I said calmly, you played yourselves. You were so focused on exploiting what you thought was my weakness that you never considered you might be wrong. Christopher gestured to his father, who pulled out a tablet. I have something for you, Mrs. Chen. Call it a wedding gift. He turned the tablet around. On the screen was a video compilation, Vanessa stealing from my room, my mother forging documents, Richard Chen meeting with both of them, discussing strategy, every bit of evidence I'd collected, and more I hadn't even known about. It seems my wife has been quite thorough in documenting your behavior, Christopher said, as have my investigators once she asked me to look into certain patterns. You have no right, Marcus started. I have every right. Claire's my wife now. Attacking her is attacking me, and I protect what's mine. The warmth had gone from Christopher's voice, leaving something cold and dangerous. You will leave her alone. You will not contact her, approach her, or make any claims on her inheritance. If you do, this evidence goes to the police. You're blackmailing us, my mother hissed. I'm establishing boundaries, Christopher corrected. Claire wished to handle this herself, but I've convinced her to accept my help. He looked at me. Teamwork, wife, I smiled. Teamwork, husband. Vanessa found her voice. What about Richard? He hasn't done anything. You can't prove. Richard Chen has 18 victims across 3 states, Christopher said. My investigators have been quite thorough. The FBI is already building a case. Your involvement is well documented. He paused. But if you stay away from Claire, I might be persuaded to let your testimony be considered cooperating witness rather than co-conspirator. Your choice. The implications hung in the air. My mother and sister could walk away from this if they walked away completely, or they could fight and risk prison. This isn't over, my mother said, but her voice shook. Yes, I said quietly. It is. We left the registry office through a side door where a car was waiting. Not an ambulance-accessible van like my family had probably expected. A sleek, black Mercedes. Christopher held the door for me, perfectly capable, perfectly healthy. His family followed in their own car. As we pulled away, I looked back at the building. My mother, Marcus, and Vanessa stood on the steps, looking lost and powerless. Good. Are you all right? Christopher asked. I'm perfect, I said, and meant it. You really did know, he said, about the wheelchair. I did research, found photos from your boarding school, you on the track team. The car accident that supposedly paralyzed you never showed up in any hospital records, but your family's company bought a specialized wheelchair the same month. I shrugged. It wasn't that hard to piece together for someone looking. And you married me anyway. You were honest about it being a business arrangement. That's more than most people offer. I looked at him, and you never pretended to love me, which I appreciated. Lies about business I can handle. Lies about emotion are what destroy people. He studied me for a long moment. Your mother did a number on you. My mother taught me to see reality clearly, I said. Not the lesson she intended, but the one I learned. We drove to the Blackwood estate where a small reception was waiting. Proper champagne, proper food, a proper celebration. Christopher's parents were kind, if reserved. Emma pulled me aside at one point. I'm glad he picked you, she said. The others were all so fake. You at least seem real. I try to be, I said. The reception lasted 2 hours, then Christopher and I were alone in the master suite of the mansion, my new home. So, he said, loosening his tie, 6 months until you want a divorce? That was the plan, I admitted. Let my family think they'd broken us up. Get them to incriminate themselves further. Then decide what happens next. And now, I thought about it, about the man who'd stood up at the altar, who'd protected me without being asked, who'd hired investigators to prove what I'd already known. Now I think 6 months might be premature, I said. Maybe we should see how this goes, as a real partnership. He smiled. I'd like that. But separate bedrooms for now, I added quickly. This is still new. Agreed. I'm not pushing for anything you're not ready for. He paused. Though I should mention, we do have to convince society this is real. Attend events. Be seen together. I can play the devoted wife in public. And in private? In private, we can be honest. Business partners who respect each other. I met his eyes. Is that enough for you? For now, he said. Ask me again in 6 months. The first month of marriage was an adjustment. I moved into the Blackwood estate fully, bringing only what was truly mine, which wasn't much. Everything else in my mother's house had been purchased with guilt money, and I wanted none of it. Christopher was, surprisingly, an excellent roommate. He kept to his schedule, respected my space, and never made demands. We had breakfast together each morning, discussing the day ahead. He was teaching me about his business empire. Real estate, yes, but also investments, acquisitions, strategic partnerships. If you're going to be my wife, he said, you should understand what I do. So I can be a better asset? So you can be an equal partner. That surprised me. You want me involved in business decisions? Why not? You're clever, you think strategically, and you have excellent instincts about people. He smiled. Plus, I could use someone who sees through manipulation. God knows there's enough of that in my industry. So I learned, sat in on meetings, reviewed contracts, discovered I had a knack for spotting the hidden clauses, the subtle traps that companies buried in legal language. You should go to business school, Christopher said, after I caught a particularly nasty poison pill in an acquisition contract. Maybe I will, I said. My family tried to contact me exactly 3 times in that first month. The first was my mother, calling from a blocked number. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail about repairing our relationship and not throwing away family over a misunderstanding. The second was Vanessa, showing up at the estate gates with tears in her eyes, begging to see me. Security turned her away. She screamed about how I'd abandoned her, how I'd turned my back on my own blood. The third was Marcus, drunk, calling at 2 a.m. to curse me out. Christopher answered the phone. Mr. Lawson, he said calmly, up a chain. If you contact my wife again, I will have you arrested for harassment. This is your only warning. The call stopped. Richard Chen was arrested 6 weeks after the wedding. It made the news. Con artist targeted inheritance heirs in multi-state scheme. His face was plastered across every local channel. My mother and Vanessa were named as persons of interest, but not charged. Christopher's lawyers had been true to their word, cooperating witnesses, not co-conspirators. But their reputations were destroyed. No one in society would touch them. Marcus lost his job when his employer learned he'd been married to a woman involved in a fraud investigation. I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. Christopher and I fell into a rhythm that was almost comfortable. He'd work late in his office, I'd read in the library. We'd meet for dinner, discuss our days, sometimes watch a movie in the screening room. He never touched me beyond the occasional hand on my back in public, never pushed for more than I was willing to give. But there were moments, times when our eyes would meet across a room and I'd see heat there. Times when his hand would linger on mine just a second too long. Times when I'd catch myself watching him work, admiring the focus in his expression. Times when I'd remember we were married and wonder what that could mean. 3 months after the wedding, Christopher's company faced a hostile takeover attempt. Lancaster Corp, a rival real estate conglomerate, had been buying up stock. They thought Christopher was vulnerable, young, supposedly disabled until recently, possibly in a sham marriage that would distract him. They didn't know who they were dealing with. They've proposed a merger, Christopher told me over breakfast, which is code for let us absorb your company before we do it by force. Can they succeed? If I make mistakes, yes. If I appear weak, definitely. He looked at me. They're going to come after you too, try to use you as leverage. How? Scandal, probably. Prove our marriage is fake. Or seduce you away from me, or just make you enough of a liability that I have to distance myself, publicly. So we make the marriage look real, I said. Can you do that, convincingly? I thought about my previous life, about Richard's seduction, how easily I'd fallen for his lies, about everything I'd learned since coming back. Yes, I said, I can do that. We started attending events together, not just the quiet dinners Christopher preferred, but galas, charity functions, industry conferences. Everywhere we went, I was on his arm, smiling, playing the devoted wife. And it wasn't as hard as I'd expected. Because somewhere in the last 3 months, I'd started to like Christopher. Not love, not yet, but genuine affection. He was funny when he wanted to be, kind in unexpected ways, brilliant in his field, generous with his knowledge. He treated me like I mattered, like my opinions had value, like I was a person, not a possession. The novelty of that hadn't worn off. We were at a gala for medical research when I met Patricia Lancaster, the CEO of Lancaster Corp. She was in her 50s, elegant with a shark's smile. "Mrs. Blackwood," she said, cornering me by the bar. "How lovely to finally meet you. I've heard so much about your unique courtship." "Have you?" I said pleasantly. "A marriage arranged so quickly, so conveniently. One has to wonder about the motivations." "I'm sure one does," I agreed. "People love to speculate." "It must be difficult," she continued, "being married to someone who is so recently disabled. Such an adjustment." "Christopher is the most capable man I've ever met," I said. "Disabled or not." "Of course, I meant no disrespect." Her smile sharpened. "Though I imagine a young woman like yourself might find the arrangement limiting. If you ever wanted to discuss opportunities outside the Blackwood organization, I'd be happy to—" "Are you offering me a job, Mrs. Lancaster?" "I'm offering you options." "I have options," I said. "I'm quite satisfied with my current position. For now, but if things change, if you find yourself needing an exit from an uncomfortable situation—" She handed me a business card. "Please don't hesitate." I took the card, smiled, and walked away. Christopher found me 10 minutes later. "Patricia cornered you. She tried to recruit me. She's trying to split us up, make you an asset she can leverage." He frowned. "I'm sorry, I didn't think she'd be so direct." "I can handle Patricia Lancaster," I said. "But we should probably make it crystal clear that our marriage is real. Really real. No room for doubt. What did you have in mind?" I pulled him into a quiet alcove, pressed him against the wall, and kissed him. It wasn't like our wedding kiss. This was heated, intense, my hands in his hair, his arms around my waist. When we broke apart, we were both breathing hard. "That clear enough?" I said. "Very clear," he managed. "Should we do that more often, for appearances?" I looked at him, really looked at him, at the way he was looking at me, like I was the only person in the room, the only person that mattered. "Yes," I said. "For appearances." But we both knew it wasn't just for show anymore. The turning point came 4 months into our marriage. I was reviewing contracts in Christopher's office when I found the file on my mother. It wasn't hidden. Christopher had never tried to hide things from me, but I hadn't gone looking either. This file was different from the evidence we'd collected for the wedding. This was older. Much older. It detailed my mother's previous marriages, 4 of them, before my father, each to a wealthy man, each ending in suspicious circumstances, sudden divorces, quick deaths, money disappearing. My mother was a professional con artist. I was the daughter of her 4th husband, a kind man who'd died when I was 2. Died, according to the death certificate. Was murdered, according to the investigator's notes in the file. My inheritance from my biological father, the man who'd abandoned me, was actually guilt money from someone who'd figured out too late what my mother was, who'd known I was in danger but didn't know how to save me without putting himself at risk. He'd left me everything, hoping I'd use it to escape. In my first life, I'd never escaped. The money had been stolen before I knew it existed. In this life, I'd escaped by accident, by running toward an arranged marriage that turned out to be my salvation. I was crying when Christopher found me. "Claire, what's wrong?" I showed him the file, watched his expression shift from confusion to understanding. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have told you earlier. I didn't know how." "She killed him. She killed my father." "My investigators believe so, yes, but it was 23 years ago. The evidence is circumstantial. We'd never get a conviction." "But she did it." "She did." He knelt beside my chair. "Claire, I'm sorry. I know this is—" "I want her destroyed," I said. "Completely. I want her to lose everything, the way she made me lose everything, the way she made my father lose his life." Christopher nodded slowly. Then we'll destroy her. Can we? Legally? Your mother has been living on that finder's fee we paid her. It's running out. She started reaching out to her old contacts, looking for her next mark. He pulled up files on his computer. If we feed her the right opportunity, let her think she's found her next wealthy victim. We document everything, I finished, and we hand it to the police with enough evidence they can't ignore it. It would take time, months, maybe a year. I have time, Padlam, I said. I have all the time in the world. We set the trap carefully. Christopher had a business associate, actually an undercover investigator, pose as a wealthy widower. Lonely, gullible, with a substantial fortune and no close family. My mother took the bait within 2 weeks. We watched through hidden cameras as she deployed every manipulation, tactic, the chance meeting, the sob story about her difficult life, the slow seduction, the hints about needing money, just temporarily, just until her own inheritance came through. We documented it all. When she suggested marriage after 3 months of dating, we documented that too. When she suggested life insurance policies, when she started researching how to access his accounts, when she made contact with someone who could provide untraceable poisons, we documented everything. The FBI arrested her 6 months after our wedding. The charges included fraud, attempted murder, and conspiracy. When they looked closer at my father's death, they reopened the case. Vanessa was arrested as an accomplice. Marcus disappeared. Probably ran before he could be charged. The trial was all over the news. Black Widow preyed on wealthy men for decades. My face was in some of the articles, identified as her daughter, the one who got away. Christopher's lawyers kept me insulated from the worst of it. I didn't testify, they had enough without me. But I attended the trial every day, sitting in the gallery with Christopher beside me. I watched my mother's masks crack one by one as the evidence mounted, watched her try to charm the jury, then intimidate them, then play victim. Nothing worked. The verdict came back. Guilty on all counts. 45 years to life. Vanessa got 15 years for her role in various schemes. I felt nothing but relief. Christopher and I celebrated quietly that night, with expensive wine in the library. How do you feel? He asked. Like I can finally breathe, I said. Like the weight I've been carrying is gone. It is gone. She can't hurt you anymore. She never could. Not this time. I looked at him. Because of you. You saved yourself, he said gently. I just provided resources. You provided a partnership. That's more than resources. He set down his wine glass, moved closer on the couch. Claire, we should talk about our arrangement. My heart started to pound. But what about it? It's been 6 months. That was your original timeline for reassessing. It was. Do you still want a divorce? I thought about the past 6 months, about learning to trust again, about discovering that partnership could be more than exploitation, about the way my heart jumped when Christopher smiled at me. No, I said, I don't want a divorce. What do you want? I want this to be real, I admitted, not just for appearances. Actually real. He pulled me closer, his hand cupping my face. It's been real for me since the wedding, he said. Since you looked at me and didn't flinch. Since you married me knowing the truth. You saw past the disability I was faking, and I saw past the victim your family tried to make you. I'm not a victim anymore. You never were. You were a survivor waiting for her moment. He kissed me softly. And now you're my wife. Really my wife. If you want to be. I want to be, whispered. We didn't leave the library for hours. 1 year after our wedding, Christopher and I renewed our vows. Real ones, in a church with friends and colleagues and hundreds of guests. Emma was my maid of honor. Christopher's father gave a speech about finally seeing his son truly happy. I wore a designer dress that cost more than my mother's annual income in her prime. My hair was done by professionals, my makeup perfect, my jewelry antique Blackwood family pieces. I looked beautiful, I felt powerful, I was happy. At the reception, I gave a speech. A year ago, I said, I married a man I barely knew. It was an arrangement, a business deal, a way to protect myself from people who wanted to hurt me. I didn't expect love. I didn't expect partnership. I didn't expect to find my best friend. Christopher smiled at me from across the room. But life surprises us, I continued. Sometimes the scariest decisions lead to the greatest joys. Sometimes the people we think are broken turn out to be whole. And sometimes we discover we're stronger than we ever imagined. I raised my glass. To surprises, to partnerships, to love that grows from respect and honesty, and to my husband, who stood up for me in every way that matters. The room applauded. Christopher came to me, pulled me into his arms, kissed me in front of everyone. When we broke apart, he whispered, I love you, Claire Blackwood. I love you too, I said, and meant it with everything I was. 5 years later, I graduated with my MBA. Christopher was in the front row cheering. 10 years later, I became CEO of my own real estate development company, a subsidiary of the Blackwood Empire. My first project was a housing complex for women escaping domestic violence. I named it after my father. 15 years later, Christopher and I had 2 children, a daughter and a son. We raised them to be kind, to be strong, to see people clearly. Emma was their favorite aunt. My mother died in prison when I was 37. I didn't attend the funeral. Vanessa was released when I was 40 and tried to contact me once. I had my lawyer send a cease and desist. Richard Chen served 12 years and came out a broken man. I heard he'd found religion, tried to make amends. I didn't care. Some debts can never be repaid. But I wasn't focused on the past anymore. I was too busy building my future. 25 years after our wedding, Christopher and I sat in the same library where we'd first admitted we loved each other. We were older now, gray-haired, with laugh lines and the comfortable intimacy of decades together. Do you ever regret it? He asked. Agreeing to marry me? Never, I said. Do you regret standing up at the altar? Best decision I ever made. He pulled me close. Though I have to ask, did you really suspect I could walk, or was that a bluff? I smiled. What do you think? I think my wife is the smartest person I've ever met, and she's been keeping me guessing for 25 years. Good, I said. I'd hate to get predictable. He kissed my temple. Never predictable, always perfect. Outside, our grandchildren played in the gardens. Inside, we had everything we'd ever needed: love, partnership, trust, and revenge, served cold and completely against everyone who'd ever underestimated us. It was, I thought, a very happy ending, the kind I'd never dreamed of in my first life, but had fought for and won in my second. The kind that reminded me every day that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is actually the beginning of something beautiful. Sometimes the arranged marriage to the man in the wheelchair is exactly what you need, especially when he stands up at the altar, especially when you stand beside him, especially when you both keep standing together for the rest of your lives.